Welcome to Italics, television for the Italian American experience. I'm your host, Anthony Tamburri. Today we're in the studio with two of the three people involved in Bordighera Press. We have Fred Gardaphé, who's one of the founders, Nick Grosso, who joined us a little bit over a decade ago, and on Zoom you have Paolo Giordano, who was also one of the founders. Paolo, Fred, and I founded Bordighera Press back in the early 90s, basically 1990, with Voices in Italian Americana, and then it morphed into Bordighera Press. The one question everyone asks us is, why Bordighera? So go ahead, Paul, it's all yours.
I was born there, number one. I think you came with me one time when we were on our way to Florence to study at the University of Florence for MA. And I think we just both, you really liked the place. And eventually, I just our conversations, and it just made sense. That's what I can think of. It made sense to the three of us to call it Bordighera Press.
Bordighera is a seaside town on the Italian Riviera. When you sent a postcard from Bordighera, they would cancel the postcard with a saying, "Per vivere un'eterna primavera, non c'è posto al mondo che Bordighera." It rhymes in Italian. We've published, Nick would know this better than the rest of us because he's the one on top of the inventory. Where are we now with numbers?
Almost 300 titles.
300 titles.
Yeah.
It's good. So let's give a little bit of history. We had the journal, Voices in Italian Americana, that was born really out of the anthology that we did From the Margins.
What happened was when we did Writings in Italian Americana, at first we weren't getting too many submissions from people. And, people were saying, oh, I don't want to be identified as an Italian, People said, well, it doesn't seem like it's going to be an important publication. I don't want my work in there. And as soon as we started getting the word out, all of a sudden people started calling us up and saying, hey, I'd like to send my work in. Well, we couldn't fit everything into the anthology. So what we did was, I said, well, we need to do something that's going to make this live on and on. Let's start a journal. Came up with VIA, Voices in Italian Americana. We were going to incorporate Voices in Italian Americana. And the lawyer said, well, what's the company that holds this? I go, what do you mean? He says, well, VIA is a product. Are you going to do other products? I said, no, I don't know. We're just going to do the journal, And then he said, well, if you have a company, then you could do all. And then Anthony said, well, maybe we would want to publish books at some point or something else. So we needed a name. But so that's the origins of it. And it became, Bordighera Press became the home for VIA. It became the home for, and we didn't really set out to be a book publisher because I was a book publisher at the time, and we were so successful we failed with City Stew Press. And we ended up turning it over to another Chicago press was the name of it. And I was at the American Italian Historical Association's conference, and Robert Viscusi had given a poem, a dinner oration, and it was oration on the most recent death of Christopher Columbus. I said, we got to publish this. So it became our first book-length publication for Bordighera Press. That was the beginning.
If you look at the first probably 10, 15 books, a good deal of them are poetry. We should give a shout out to two people. One is Howard Mansing, who was then chair of the Department of Foreign Languages and Literatures at Purdue University, who gave us the support. And then that support is in the person, Deborah Starwich, who until we moved to New York was basically our go-to person was our Nick. Nick is now our Deborah Starwich. Deborah was
we ought to create a Deborah
Nick.
Starwich Award.
Exactly. So we were fortunate that our institutions, our three institutions, in one way or another, helped us. Yeah, we were doing what you were said about so many copies, right? Because we were still doing quote unquote
storage,
camera-ready copy, which people may not remember. You would print out on 8.5 by 11. We'd bring it to the printer, and they would print us I think we did 500 copies. Yeah, it's been amazing how it's morphed into, the technology has been wonderful. You want to talk a little bit about the technology?
Yeah, currently we're do print on demand, so that allows us to really kind of diminish our overhead costs. So we can print a few hundred or a copy at a time and really just address as demands come in.
Paul, you edited the first big book we did back in '94, Joseph Tuziani. We like to think that it helped a little bit, you know, in the academic world with that. And fortunately, we were able to reprint that. If you want to just talk about that process a little bit.
The way that now the technologies have kind of advanced, all we need is a scan of an edition. And so if we chop it, scan it, and then within a week, within a month, you have a good, solid book in your hands, and that looks as printed yesterday.
It's the original, exactly. So what have been some of our challenges along the way?
I would say dealing with a growing number of writers who complain that they don't get published because they're Italian American. Dealing with the egos of the writers along the way. I mean, that's always been one of the hardest things. But, you know, and then really giving them honest, sincere criticism about their work. We do that, and it's not always things that they want to hear. And so that's been some of the challenges. And also the challenge has been there's such a need to get some of the masterpieces reprinted. You know, for example, I have always taught Jose Riminelli's Benedetta in Geisterland. It's out of print. I can't use it anymore, and I would love to use it in my class. You know, for me, you know, probably what I would focus on in the next few years is trying to find the funding that will endow a reprint series, keeping books in print. Anybody can get a book published, but can you get it sold and can you keep it in print? You know, we look at a book and immediately we think of instant bestsellers, we think of all the publicity given to the top writers in the United States, but that's less than 1% of the number of writers that are getting, you know, trying to get published and so on. And that attention that's given to them and the money that they're getting is no way indication of what, you know, what really happens. So I think the reality of what is publishing for and how do we maintain books in print, because publishing is what? So people can read the books. You know, and we have to discuss, you know, probably at some point, is anybody reading anymore? You know, and if they are, you know, is it going to be? I mean, I have been dragged reluctantly into reading electronic texts. I hated it at first. You know, I've come to accept it, but I still don't like reading. I like to take my book on the train and so on and so forth. So, you know, those are a lot of the challenges that we are.
But speaking to the challenges, I think part of it is creating Italian American literature that is not just the stigmatized mafia and pizza.
Yeah.
It's creating a nuanced perspective of who Italian Americans are, and there's not necessarily a market for that. People don't want to necessarily see they're not in organized crime, they're not just cooking. They have lives as anyone else, and creating that kind of nuanced picture of Italian Americans, I think, is a challenge because it's easy to kind of rely on those caricatures. And when you have a little more nuance, the sales aren't as high, it's harder to kind of get that wider recognition. And finding those voices that can really uplift an Italian American experience while also kind of doing a literary justice is a challenge.
Yeah, the literature has always existed, the recognition of it has not. And it really wasn't until a book like Italian Americana comes along and really gives us a panorama. There's a precedent to Via and there's a precedent to Bordighera Press. And another person who was a supporter of ours was the late Albert Mancini. And he was already a senior scholar, you know, a senior prof. And here we were, these junior professors. And Mancini, and Paul, you can fill in the blanks, but Mancini called up Paul and said he wanted to do this publication, et cetera. And it all started with, I think it was, what was it, Quark? The program was Quark.
Oh.
And it was Italiana, which now is an
remember.
occasional publication of Bordighera Press. We have a lot of debts, I think, good debts. We have a lot of debts. And another one is, of course, the Fondazione Giovanni Agnelli.
Oh my God.
Because they were the ones who really set us up financially with back then, 89 or 90, with I think it was a $7,000 grant, which of course was, we could do a lot of things today with that, but we did definitely a lot of stuff with that back then, and we really owe it to...
Well, we had gone to every single Italian American organization in Chicago and in the United States and knocked on the door and said, we would like to start this journal. Nobody said anything. Nobody, they all said no, they just ignored us.
What, of course, is we're here because we didn't say we're here because as of last month, Bordighera Press is now officially an entity of the John D. Calandra Italian American Institute, of Queens College, of CUNY, and so we can say it is a quote-unquote academic press. Under the umbrella of Italian Americana cultural articulations, we're probably the most stable, right, to date.
I would say, yeah.
1990 with Via, 1991 or 2 with the first book we've done. Right. And it's been 34 plus years.
We've never had any crises that we've had to attend in terms of finances or in terms of energy. And a lot of that is due to Paolo and Anthony setting books themselves. Sometimes I call, what are you doing today? Oh, I'm setting this, I'm typing this book. I call Paolo, what are you doing? Oh, I'm typing the issue. When Deborah came along, Deborah relieved us of a lot of that.
Yeah.
And we don't want to admit it, but we're getting older. We need to, and what's going to happen to this thing? And Emerson said that, an institution is the shadow of a man, one person. Well, this is 3 people and all the people who worked with us, and we didn't want that institution to go away when we went away, and so that was the key. And Anthony found a way to work this into the future of the Calandra Institute, and Nick is
the future of
the future. And I feel more comfortable about it because you do all this work and you want to know where's it going to go.
We've done some different things. More recently, we did the book on The Angel in the Park, M.S. Stebbins, right? Yeah. Which, of course, she was not Italian American, but and it speaks to sort of our range, right? So we've decided at one point that we had to be flexible, we had to be open, and so in this case, it's an American who goes to Italy, lives in Italy for a good decade, whatever, in the 19th century, along with about a dozen other women. They all live together, they're intimately involved, they're couples, etc. And here we find out in 2022 when Maria Teresa Commetto published her book in Italian, I had no idea that the angel, this icon here in New York City, right, the angel of the Bethesda Fountain, I had no idea that was done by this woman in the 19th century who was living in Italy at that time. And it was done in Italy, and I think it was bronzed in Germany and then sent to the United States. And now it's, of course, this icon of American culture.
It's very much the connection between countries and people. It's not just, oh, my bloodline is from here, right, but how do I interact with these cultures, whether it's in the United States or in Italy or anywhere Italian immigrants ended up.
Yeah. I don't know if you remember, Paul, the first book we did in Italian was a book called Il Libretto d'Opera. This was a person from Australia, and she ended up getting tenure off of the book. I thought it was great. So there are certain things for me that stick out like that, not necessarily this is a better book than that book, but the impact that the book may have had at a local level, whatever. But then, and it was a book that back then we were doing 500 copies, and I remember we had a couple of books that sold out within 6 months. And we need to give a shout out to Helen Barolini, right? Because of Chiaroscuro. And I don't know if you guys, one of you want to tell the story about that, but.
Well, I think whenever an author would come to me, I would say, look, let Bordighera be the safety net. Go try the best publishers you can possibly get. And then when you get rejected, you know, because we didn't have the resources to be able to promote books. Anybody, you know, we could produce a book, but could we promote it and advertise it and get it out there? And Helen said, look, I believe in what you guys are doing. Here's my book of essays, Chiaroscuro. I loved them. Anthony loved them. Paolo loved them. And so we put it together and we put it out there. I was a member of the National Writers Union. I was the Chicago local chair of the National Writers Union. I used to do workshops on negotiating book contracts. When we wrote our book contract, we gave the largest amount of royalty ever to an author. And we had a clause in there that said, if another press comes along and wants to publish it, we will release it after a year, I think it was.
Yeah, or we said yeah.
And we didn't share copyright with them. They always owned the copyright. I was going to make sure that we were going to be an author's press. And after the book came out, the University of Wisconsin said, we would like to do this.
Yeah, and she said, nope, we're going to do it here, and they're going to have to wait a year or whatever, and I give them another edition, which was really nice.
She was our celebrity, yeah.
Yeah, we had a celebrity. We had a celebrity early on. Jose Rimanelli, for example, came to us later with a couple of his books.
You know, I wanted to be a safety net for what fell through, because there were a lot of really good books that fall through. The writings of Tony Artizzoni, for example, they should be picked up, and he had been picked up by major presses. And then they get to a certain point where they would come and say, well, you know, I'm just a mid-list fiction writer. Nobody wants to publish mid-list, you know, because they're not bestsellers. So we were there for those mid-list people who fell through the cracks.
And we continue to do some good translation from the very beginning. Mm-hmm. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Paul, I think we started with a book you brought to us, right? I Quattro Camminanti by Rodolfo De Biasio.
Yeah,
but we've done 40 or 50 already translations, right? If not, not more. And we've been fortunate. Why? We've been lucky.
Well, we won 2 years ago. We won the ALTA, the American Literary Translators Award for Italian prose and translation, with Silvana Laspina's Penelope.
Right.
And so when we won amongst some big presses.
Exactly.
We did it on a shoestring budget, and we managed to compete with the big guys.
We were the David, exactly. And we competed with the Goliath. And that's important. It's important to bring these, you know, the translations. I mean, we've published, you know, I can't think of all of them, but I know a name that comes to mind for me being Silvio Ramat, for example, is a name in Italian poetry that had a certain resonance in Italy, and we published some of his stuff. And speaking of bringing books back into print, we brought back into print this year where it all started, and that is From the Margin, Writings in Italian Americana.
No, and it's a book that I use all the time teaching in my classes, and so it's important.
What do we, and Nick, this is also a question for you, because you've been involved really intimately with all the books. Where do you see us going? What's the future look like?
I mean, we're on kind of living on your shoulders. You've created a whole field where now people, as Fred mentioned, want to publish with Bordighera Press. So it's not this kind of safety net. Now it's a destination. And so it's kind of continuing to build on what does it mean to be in the Italian diaspora, what does it mean to be multi-ethnic in the United States, and continuing to explore that and that type of literature, I think, is where the future is for Bordighera.
Whether it's through the Bridge Award, and the Bridge Award is basically 2 books in English published in Italian, 2 books in Italian published in English. We published a couple of those, most recently The Indiscreet by Elisabetta Razzi, and then we've also published 3 of his novellas by Alain Elkan. So it's nice to have people coming to us of that stature, right? That they come to us, and we've done some of that as well. So how many books have we averaged in the last 10 years? A year?
Since I've been here, almost 20 books a year.
20 books a year.
Wow. I remember we used to do 2, 3 books, and because these guys would typeset, I had nothing to do with typesetting.
We've done a couple of big books recently.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. There was the
Fake Italian.
Fake Italian was almost a 500-page epic
Yeah.
on a Staten Island childhood where he doesn't feel like he belonged because he was more of a nerd. He was more into superheroes,
Yeah.
and in the 80s in Staten Island, you needed to be a tough guy. You couldn't be the nerd
The
kind
nerd.
of with the superheroes. So
Yeah.
it explored his kind of coming of age.
He really went out and hawked the book. You really need to go out and promote your book.
Yeah, we're talking about Mark DiPaolo, his Fake Italian, and what he did was he captured the mindset of a generation of people who can't be the Italians that their parents were, don't want to be the Italians that they see on TV, go to Italy and find out, wait a minute, I'm American and maybe Italian, but I'm not Italian like I'm from Italy, so what can I be? So he titles it Fake Italian, I think in a kind of a thought-provoking way. Is this all that we can be is fake Italian? And what he does in the process is try to muster together a way of being Italian that he can sustain and bring into the future. I wrote about it, and it's even in my new study of Italian American humor and irony. So,
Well, I think that's one of the things we're doing is we're redefining Italian American, in this case, literature, right? It was something that came up in '91 when we did From the Margin. What is Italian American literature? And of course, what is Italian American cinema? And those definitions were a little bit limiting, right? And instead, we're finding out that there are just so many other ways in which people are articulating their Italian American identity, that the themes are not necessarily those same old themes, and so on and so forth. We've contributed to a rethinking of Italian American culture, Italian American identity, and things of that sort.
Yeah, it's definitely the perennial question in the United States is what does it mean to identify as American?
Right.
But I think we're also asking it of Italy, what does it mean to be Italian? Because we published now 2 editions of Komla Ebri Kosi's books
Exactly.
on embarrassments and home. He's an African immigrant to Italy and very much explores what it means to be Italian in a culture where he more singularly stands out. And so what does it mean now to be Italian in the 21st century?
In Italy, exactly. And the 3 of us were born here in the United States. Paul instead, as we said before, Paul was born in Bordighera and came here. You were 9 or 10, right, Paul, when you came?
Yeah, 9. I was 9 years old.
Yeah.
The first place we lived in was up in the ridges, High Ridge Road,
Ah,
our sponsors. But when we went back to Italy, we ended up on Spruce Street. We were the only white family on the whole street, on the whole block. The rest were Puerto Ricans or blacks.
I was born in the neighborhood that Paul came to when he was 10 years old. We grew up together. We had a lot of Italian immigrants, but they were basically all from southern Italy. And Paul's family was the only, you guys were the only Northerners, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah,
That's true.
yeah. And then, of course, Paul's father was very much involved commercially in the neighborhood. So there was an exposure, of course, that was unique in its own way. But it's all the idea of rethinking the notion of what it means to be Italian American. We found that some people still holding on to that old definition, and it becomes challenging at times to have those discussions, or they're engaging in certain performances, certain sort of what I have called acts of minstrelsy, where they think they're being sort of comical, and they sort of are, but they're engaging too much in stereotypes. I think it's a challenge more for your generation.
Well, it's how to walk that line between being a thoughtful, kind of self-realized person, but I think the issue is kind of also earning a living.
Yeah.
And so how do you earn a living and be true to your identity without kind of performing for outsiders?
Right. And how do we maintain a sense of humor, right?
if something is done in the name of humor, and you laugh, the question is, what am I laughing at? And when you ask that question, you have to say, is this something that is expected, which is what I call reactionary humor? It's our reaction. Or is it revolutionary humor? Am I laughing because it makes me feel uncomfortable and it makes me think of something else? And we are filled, Italian American culture is filled to the brim with what I call reactionary humor. And I think when we look at it in terms of Bordighera publication, that's exactly what I mean when I'm looking for something new. I'm looking for, I don't mean revolutionary meaning left wing or, I just mean turning, what does a revolution do? It turns the gaze around so that you're looking at something new. And the literature, the poetry, whatever it is that enables you to develop and expand your critical thinking and critical consciousness, that's what I look for in a Bordighera book.
Yeah.
The electrifying vernacular of escape. As a girl, Marie read so much my mother branded her lazy, a withering accusation in our house of ceaseless toil. In her way, mother was a Calvinist. She believed in mortifying the flesh, denaturing will. Work took your mind off things. It's nothing, she'd like to say, of our discomfort. Just thank God you have both arms and legs.
We're here because of the transition from Bordighera Press, from Bordighera Incorporated, to the John D. Calandra Italian American Institute. We've been at the John D. Calandra Italian American Institute since my arrival. Then President James Meiskens welcomed us with open arms. Subsequent President Felix Matos Rodriguez continued the open arms. And now Frank Wu, President Frank Wu, the current president, is the one who agreed to this transfer of ownership. So we really need to thank Frank Wu, President Wu. We need to thank, of course, Chancellor Matos Rodriguez. And so we need to thank you two especially as well if you're watching. So we'll make this an arrivederci. See you soon. Paul will be in touch.
Ciao, bello.
Thank you for watching this episode of Italics. I'm Anthony Tamburri. Arrivederci alla prossima puntata.